Welcome back to another episode of the Dynasty Dingers podcast. Today is April 29th. It is another week of baseball. Before we welcome in our very special guest, probably our best guest in the last year, I want to say hey to what's up to Doc.
I mean, best guest just immediately shames every other guest. Hey, other guests, I still love you, even though Matt has turned his back. I'm happy to be here. I am going to a private high school right now. It's embarrassing. Y'all, what is this? I haven't seen my upper lip in this long. It's kind of embarrassing. I feel like I've lost my power aura. But luckily we got some actual real men still here today. We got Matt and we got a guest. I'm excited to have Frank Stampfl on today.
Yeah, and to every one of our guests that we've had and future guests, you will always be the best guest that day. But Frank, it is a pleasure to welcome you into the show today. We kind of talked a little bit before we hit record, and this is amazing for me. I kind of gave you some nice notes just off the Fantasy to Baseball Today podcast that I've listened to for years, and you've done such an incredible job. So we're very happy to have you, and thank you.
Yes, I appreciate you guys for having me on. It's fun. I've been doing mock drafts with Doc for what feels like a year now. And every time I see your avatar in a draft room, it's, that mustache. And I was like, all right, does he actually look like this? I'm going to find out now. And here we are. No mustache.
Shaved it this morning.
Oh,
gosh, what was I thinking? That was dumb. I didn't have to do that. My wife
you also
thinks I do have to do that.
You came off a movie where the mustache was in like full force. You want to talk to Frank a little bit about that?
I mean, it was I'll be promoting a Doc Holliday movie, which is how I got the moniker for that. I was actually in character 2 years ago, March 2023. But then this one, I was just playing a pilgrim, William Bradford. He's like one of the Mayflower guys, American pioneers. And I was about to shave the mustache off a month ago. And but they said, no, keep it. My wife said, I'm going to kill you. It's been half a year. It's been since the fall. So anyway, folks, I'm glad we have this stud guest here, this CBS monster, Frank Stampfl, and we are spending it talking about my mustache. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling great.
Is Adam Sandler in that movie by any way, Doc?
No, I'm the most famous person in both movies. Not good.
That means I probably won't watch it. You guys know I only watch Adam Sandler movies, so sorry, man.
I actually watched, is it Pixel? The movie where they have the video game kind of collage. And I was surprisingly impressed. And he just keeps making things that are kind of enjoyable to watch. And I feel like his reviews have gotten worse and worse through the years of that Netflix contract. But I'm kind of jumping on the bandwagon with you, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, it's very niche Adam Sandler for me. 1990 to 2005, that's about it. Anything after or before, it's nope, not for me. So that's about it. I've got a very select catalog of movies I've seen in my life. But who knows? Maybe I'll watch a movie with Doc Eisenhower in it.
So will you be watching Happy Gilmore too?
You know what? I'm not a huge fan of all these kind of like sequels from movies that came out 20, 30 years ago. It just kind of feels like they're really trying too hard to tap into nostalgia, but I probably will watch that one. Yes, I will.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that one. All right. Great warm up. Let's dive into it. Frank, we've got segment 1 directly focused on you today. And the first question that Doc and I had for you was just simply, what does your professional journey look like up into this point today where you're the host of CBS's number one fantasy baseball podcast? I'd say the number one fantasy baseball podcast in our niche. What does that journey look like if you could walk us through it?
Yeah, so a pretty up and down, rocky journey. I think most people have had, something similar along the way. Didn't have a job out of college in the field. I went to school for film and broadcasting, and out of college, I was a bartender for about a year. So that was the first gig, and then eventually landed a job with MLB.com as a video editor. So just getting to watch a bunch of baseball every single night, kind of like I do now, but editing clips and things like that. Also worked at SiriusXM as a part-time, sending highlights to the newsroom and things like that. Eventually landed an internship with this company called the Fantasy Sports Network. So that was FNTSY. There were no A's in there. Fantasy Sports Network. They're now known as Sports Grid. They've kind of gone the betting route of things, which many companies have, and I totally get why they have. But a decade ago, they were all fantasy sports, and I joined them as an intern helping out with video production. Eventually they offered me a full-time role as a radio producer. Eventually that kind of parlayed into a radio show and being on air and doing some really awesome TV opportunities. I was doing like some stuff on like the MSG channel for like Knicks pregame, which was a dream come true. A huge Knicks fan as well, along with like Yankees and Jets and all that stuff. But with doing that, like some TV opportunities and radio opportunities, eventually I got a call from Adam Azer, who was the host of this podcast. I also, worked full time with Nando DeFino at the time, who, previously was with CBS. So there was all these kind of like connections being made, and I knew of Adam Azer and I listened to the podcast for years. And we were talking beforehand how surreal it is that this is kind of the gig that I wound up landing, because Fantasy Baseball Today was the first fantasy podcast that I listened to when I was back in college. And so I graduated in 2013, started playing fantasy when I was in high school. So like 07, 08. And that was the first podcast I listened to. So I look up to Adam Azer as like the messiah of fantasy hosting, and to get a call from him and he's like, hey, we want to bring you in to potentially host this podcast. It was surreal. Obviously it worked out. And, that's how I got to this point. And, just talking beforehand and hearing from other people, it's really cool, just the response. And I know some people were kind of nervous about how it would go early on. Totally get that. I mean, it was so established for so long. For me, I'm just trying to keep the train on the track. Scott and Chris do a tremendous job, super smart guys. And so it's mostly just, me trying to keep this train rolling, kind of mix in some of my things here and there, do a lot of things that they've done before. But mostly just, keep doing what they've done for like the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's a fantastic story. And we like to start our show with any of our guests and just kind of building the backstory, right? Because I think a lot of you that are at these pillar positions within the industry, we listen to you every day, or our listeners listen to you as well. And we just have a common knowledge that, you are attached to the brand, but I like to know how you got there and who you are. And I think that does a really good job of expressing exactly the journey you took, because you're right. And I found that, and I want Doc to kind of jump in here and allude to it a little bit too, but who we know and the relationships we build, they're crucially important. And that kind of gets pushed aside to the fantasy baseball community because we are so in the mathematics of things. But I appreciate you sharing that.
What am I supposed to jump in on, man? That was just a statement. What the heck? I'm just going to talk about things. Listen, we're all human beings. Frank here's a stud. I'm going to whoop him. And I think I'm in a couple of leagues with him. Man, very ironic. We can't even talk about this. I'm in a score sheet league with Frank. I mean, I'm just going to put it out. If any of our listeners or viewers know what a score sheet league is, it's just like just think Windows 95. If you don't know what it is, it's so crazy. Like Frank, is it not oddly addicting? But like, I have no way of really explaining it in a way that's going to keep our listeners entertained. But that's a fun league, man.
Yeah, it's like fantasy meets simulation meets real life. It's you're setting an actual batting lineup. You're setting a starting rotation, a bullpen. Which players you want to get pinch hit for, and when you want relievers to come in. It's like the closest thing to real life simulation, but also fantasy baseball kind of mixed in there. So it is a very unique experience. I was actually brought along to share a team with Nando DeFino, which I now run completely. Thanks, Nando. I appreciate that. I text him every now and then. I'm like, hey, do you care about like this and that? Do you want to make a trade? Do you care who we draft? And he's just like, I've got 3 kids running around. I have no idea what's going on. It's up to you. So I'm like, all right, I guess I just run this team now. So yeah, it's a very interesting experience. I'm looking at another league we're in together, the Memorial Magazine League. You are 1.5 points ahead of me in the Roto standing. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see, man. I don't know what it is. I was never a pitcher. I'm not even 6 feet tall, so it'd be tough. I'd have to be Marcus Stroman, height over heart, whatever the heck he says. I'm not sure that's working out for him these days, but maybe we'll talk about Sonny Gray. I don't know, man. I seem to do well with pitching, so I seem to work out. I forget. I was trying to get a trade done with you in score sheet, but you wouldn't move off of him. I don't know. It's been a good time. I mean, I'm hoping Ryan Weathers. I think I have him in every league, so we'll see about that. I think I just blew maybe in Memorial League. I think I blew about all my budget on Matthew Liberatore, so hopefully that holds up there too. Gosh, I want to talk more trash, but honestly, dude, I'm in like 20 leagues, Frank. And so I barely remember who the frig's on my team. I'm clicking around actively trying to see what's going on. Okay, yeah, we're right there. We're right there. Wilson Contreras turning it around. Michael Garcia, underrated. Brendan Donovan. I remember I was whining about Brendan Donovan in our draft room because it was like that guy who I bid, like it was like $2 or $3. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm just trying to get someone a bid. It was mid-draft, Brendan Donovan, for the auction. And I'm like, okay, someone's going to bid something on him, and no one bid on him. And I was so like, I just wasted a roster slot. I want these sexy prospects that'll never play this year. And turns out Brendan Donovan's actually incredibly useful this year. So we got that going.
Yeah, and Weathers had a really nice rehab start. Health, we'll see, right? We'll see if that holds up. Frank, that kind of leads us into the next piece of this segment, the next question we have for you, which is, being a host and being so busy running the brand, how do you find the time for your leagues first? And then secondly, do you play in kind of a hybrid of industry leagues as well as, I'd say, more amateur leagues, right? Home leagues, friend leagues. And what does that mix kind of look like for you?
Yeah, so it is really difficult. And I kind of hate talking about this as like complaining or anything, because obviously incredibly lucky to be able to do what I do and happy to do it. But it is a labor of love. There is a lot of work that goes into it. And, most nights, my night starts, literally my day starts when the night starts. And I kind of work a like 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift every night, just watching baseball as soon as the games start up at night, building the rundown. We usually record around, midnight, 12:30 a.m. Eastern time, and then, editing and all that stuff. And by the time all that's done, it's like 3, 4 a.m. And that's when I go to sleep. Daily waivers are definitely tough. I try to be in as many leagues that either don't have waivers or only run them like once per week. Fab on Sundays, which Sunday is just a whole different nightmare because all those fabs for all those teams, and then you're reviewing 3 days worth of baseball. It is a very, very busy day. Sundays are. So it is a delicate balance. Happy to do it though. And in terms of, industry leagues versus home leagues, I have 4 industry leagues. I guess you could say I'm in Tout Wars, 15-team mixed roto auction. I'm in NL Labor, the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational. Doc, I guess you can call that Score Sheet League an industry league, right? There's a bunch of other, industry smart people in that league as well. Everything else, my other 12 leagues are all either home leagues or public NFBC leagues that really anybody who has, any money that wants to join a fantasy baseball league could have joined. So, it's kind of an interesting combination where, some are home leagues, but like these NFBC leagues, just because they're not quote unquote expert leagues, they are really tough, man. Like these people are putting money on the line. They know exactly what they're doing. Really smart drafters. A lot of them are using software. So, it's not just like, all right, go in there, dominate and steal everyone's money. It's like, no, most of the time those people are dominating me, but it's really good competition. And I live for competition. I always have. It's like playing sports growing up. All right, I'm not going to be a professional athlete. Let's play as many fantasy sports as humanly possible. And so I do crave that competition. And there's really good competition on the NFBC.
Real question. With that schedule, have you considered a move to Pacific time? Because that sounds way better.
I have thought about it. I actually moved less than a year ago. I made this big move from New York to New Jersey. So not really that big at all. I'm just not ready to be that far away from family yet. A lot of my family still lives in New York, family, friends, people I grew up with. So I think at some point I've got some family in LA and California, some close friends as well. So it's something I have thought about. People have told me like San Diego is the most beautiful place to live in the entire country. So yeah, I mean, something like that would be awesome. And starting recording at 9 p.m. or 9:30 sounds a lot better than, midnight Eastern time. So maybe at some point, but right now, not so much.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm leaving the West Coast, and it's a conversation that I'll have often. I have the benefit of being in a time zone where baseball ends and it's still 10:30. I grew up in the Midwest, so baseball would end at usually midnight, right? 12:30, especially before the pitch clock. And I do not take it for granted because it does change the way of fandom first and foremost, right? You can stay up and watch games where traditional people on the East Coast, if they have a 9 to 5, maybe aren't able to. And then secondly, when you start writing, right, you put the prep and the post work into it, right? The editing and the posting. It is just a different experience when you're on the West Coast. But I think family is important. So I like that you said that, Frank. That's why we're moving. But it is interesting when you're talking about the 7 to 4, because that's just the nature of the beast, and having the position that you have, right? And giving us as the listener the content. So we'll keep an eye on where you're at geographically, but great little pointer there. Doc, are we ready to get into some players?
I was born ready. I was born ready, in case you didn't hear the first one. But yeah, I'm born ready.
All right, Frank, we're gonna talk some ball. We got to mention before we jumped on, you're gonna be more in the analyst seat today, so I'm really excited to see you to do your thing. And funny enough, some of these topics are actually things that you guys covered on this morning's episode. So I'm gonna try and steer away from that narrative into a little bit more of just general conversation. So first question we had for you is just slow starts, right? We've seen a number of top players come out of the gate and not really perform up to expectations. Mike Trout's average is down. Luis Robert is putting up some interesting counting stats, but average is pretty horrific. Manzardo has shown some power, but the average also not there. Casas is slow. Vientos is starting to come around, but we still don't see the numbers. So the first question for you, and allude however you'd like, is really just what do you take from the first month of baseball? And if you have concerns, what are those concerns that you're looking for in the data? And then secondly, from a metrics perspective that maybe excite you about a buy now player, which players in this list, and I'll add Jordan to it, do you see the numbers looking good for?
Yeah, you got all that, Frank?
Yeah.
That was a lot. I should have probably broke that up a little bit better.
All right, so let's start up at the top here. So what am I looking for the first month of the season? I think the first month is where you're most likely to find breakouts and people doing things differently. And I think mostly pitchers, right? Velocity being up, new pitch mix. For hitters, you can hear some things like a batting stance or like where they're batting in the lineup. I think mostly the first month is you're trying to evaluate, breakouts and players who, might take off this season. Like Pete Crow Armstrong looks like an amazing one so far. Someone I was definitely wrong about because I had as a bust this upcoming season. So that's really what I'm mostly focused on. In terms of slow starters, it's kind of a sliding scale for me. Like the top 100 players, I really am going to give the benefit of the doubt until at least Memorial Day, the first third of the season, first 2 months of the season. Now, there are players that pick it up even after that. Like Corbin Carroll's an example last year where he didn't pick it up until really June, or like Jake Berger had an awesome end of June on and really got his numbers back to where they need to be. So there are examples of, players still picking things up even after Memorial Day. But this is such a long season. Like we have to be able to preach patience. And that's like what's so interesting about hosting a daily fantasy baseball podcast is that we have people on like YouTube in the comments and stuff in the chat room, like constantly crushing players who are struggling and saying like, can I drop insert top 50 player that I drafted? Or like, I want to drop Yainer Diaz for Agustin Ramirez. Like you can, I wouldn't tell you to do that. You invested a lot to get someone like Yainer Diaz, but you really do. You have to have some level of patience, especially on the players that you drafted early on in the season. Now I say sliding scale because I think picks 100 to 200, we're kind of getting to that point where, if there's someone else who emerges, or if you really need that roster spot, I think you have to make some tough decisions. Like Gavin Williams is a name that comes to mind. He was probably drafted in the top 150, maybe top 125, where he has looked like a mess this season. And if you really, really need that roster spot, if there's another pitcher that emerges that has upside and he's the worst player on your team, I could see, okay, maybe you drop someone like Gavin Williams. Outside the top 200 picks, those were your lottery tickets, your dart throws. Like, yeah, at this point, if it's not working out, I think you can kind of move on and maybe come back to a player like that later on in the season. So it is a sliding scale. I think mostly I'm looking for breakouts and, things that I think can stick more for the long term this early in the season. In terms of like struggles, most veteran players, I'm just going to give the benefit of the doubt, kind of like a blind faith. Some guys that are a little bit older, it is a little bit tougher, like a Marcus Semien, Christian Walker. Is this just the beginning of the end? They're getting into their mid-30s. That definitely is a possibility. I still would call those players buy low, but it also is a possibility that these guys are just starting that decline in their career, and they don't get back to the player that they once were. So I think that kind of covers that first part of it. Once we get into the players now, you mentioned Mike Trout, Luis Robert, Kyle Manzardo, Tristan Casas, Mark Vientos, Yordan Alvarez. So this is kind of a wide range of where players were drafted this year. Mike Trout, as long as he's healthy, I think he's going to be good. Now he's batting 170 with a 731 OPS. The strikeout rate is elevated, and he's hitting more fly balls this season, so that will lend itself to a lower batting average. But even his XBA is currently 252. So if you think he's going to stay healthy, I don't really think he's going to stay healthy, then I would look to buy. And I think the batting average will be much better moving forward for someone like Mike Trout. Luis Robert, the speed has been great. 10 steals, 26 games, everything else, disaster for Luis Robert. I was really hoping that there would be motivation for him this season to play well so he can be traded, right? Like, let me put my best foot forward, try my best, flash my skills, and, hopefully the Dodgers come calling and say, hey, man, we want Luis Robert, and, his value is going to take off after that. It doesn't look like that's the case so far. I think he's been too patient. He's, walking a lot more this season. Some players, I think it makes more sense for them to just be true to themselves and be really aggressive. Like, if you're an aggressive free swinger and that's what you've made your career on, at some point it's going to catch up. But I also think that's how you've succeeded in the past. You kind of have to stick with that. So Luis Robert, if you could buy really low, I guess, but I'm a little bit worried about him too. Not sure he can stay healthy. Manzardo, 7 homers, OPS over 100, lower batting average, hitting way too many fly balls. I kind of feel like he might settle in here as a lower batting average guy unless something changes. I think he kind of there has to be a middling point here where he sacrifices some power to hit for better batting average. I think Kyle Manzardo being a 250 hitting 25 home run hitter is better than a 215 hitting 35 home run hitter. So I think he kind of has to find that balance. Am I buying on him? There's not really a huge track record here. He was a good prospect. If someone is not, if someone's trying to just sell high on him and, you can get him at a decent price, I think Kyle Manzardo is going to be a useful player, but I'm interested to see what he does with his approach moving forward and whether or not, he does try to hit for more batting average on purpose, actively trying to hit for more batting average moving forward. Tristan Casas, a tough one, signs of life lately. Alex Cora and the Red Sox said he was going to hit against left-handed pitching this season. That has not been the case. He has not started against a lefty all year. So Red Sox, you are liars, and I do not appreciate that because I have Tristan Casas in a few spots this season. As for buying this year, he's a tough one. I need more playing time with him. The quality of contact looks bad. I think long-term, if you're talking dynasty, I do think that there is still a Matt Olson type impact coming at some point for Tristan Casas. Good plate discipline, power, I think is legit. We haven't seen it yet this year. If you could buy really low, fine. In dynasty, definitely looking to buy on someone like Tristan Casas. Mark Vientos, I do kind of like the buy here. Was worried about the plate discipline coming into the season, and he's not really striking out. It's a 20% strikeout rate. The quality of contact hasn't been there. Similar kind of story to Luis Robert, where he's being much more patient this season. Go back to being aggressive, man. If you're going to strike out 25 to 30% of the time, but you'll give me those 25-ish home runs, 25-plus home runs, yeah, I want that version of Mark Vientos. So I think better days are coming. We've seen him kind of flash a little bit, did hit a home run off a position player. So I do think better days are coming for Vientos. I like what I've seen from the strikeout rate so far from him. Yordan Alvarez, yeah, this is kind of actually, let me walk myself back a little bit. Yordan Alvarez would be an example of the blind faith, yes, he's just going to figure it out. But the knees are kind of a thing here. They were more of a talking point this offseason than previous offseasons. They said they don't want him playing in the outfield. He's going to be more suited just for designated hitter this year. And they were cognizant. They're we've got to pay more attention to the knees here. And left after a weird slide on Monday. So, normally, if I didn't have any injury concerns for a player of this caliber, I would just say, yes, blind faith, buy. He's going to be awesome. No doubt about it. The fact that there are knee concerns for both of his knees lingering here, and maybe this is just the way I play. I am much more safe in the early rounds. I don't like to take risks early on. And I still think Yordan Alvarez is a decent risk, at least in terms of injury. Production, no problem. I think as long as he's healthy, he'll be awesome. And he'll if he's healthy now, he's going to be awesome at some point. I don't know if he's completely healthy. So that one's a little bit more scary. Sorry, I just talked for like 10 minutes, but I tried to answer all your players and questions and everything there.
Dude, I personally can't tell that Frank has been hosting and saving up this analyst energy. Jeez, I don't know the Dragon Ball Z terms, but I'm imagining it that these power levels are over 9,000. That was awesome, dude. You went on a rampage. You crushed it. I don't even think you're necessarily like way off with PCA hate. And listen to the thing. I really, especially with the young players, stay away from hate. Or I try to like, I'll call things out objectively, but I'm never going to root for someone's failure or like delight in it. Once they get a first like $10 million or so, okay, maybe they're more fair game. But it's like, okay, these kids are trying to get a career here with the prospects, right? But with Pete Crow Armstrong, I never disliked the guy really, but he's just not been on my target list either. I've always said, okay, well, there clearly there's tools here. There's strength, there's speed, and that's pretty obvious. His sprint speed is 96th percentile. His bat speed is pretty solid. His EVs are okay. But here's the deal. He's like one of the worst in the league at chasing right now. He's chasing a lot of pitches still, not really taking walks. So if you're in an OBP league, or if you just like are someone who's wondering, can you get away with chasing that much? I think this 286 BA is probably BS. It's a lie. That was just too good I couldn't pass that up. But and so I mean, I think this is a great selling point for him. But yeah, man, great analysis all around. That was good, man. Usually I'm the guy who says way too much, and to have someone who it's so cool to see you, bro, because you're like, I can tell every single day you do this, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna be like Frank when I grow up and get my mustache back. And why did I get an accent? I don't know.
I'm going to pivot there, Doc. That was pretty fantastic. I think it was more of an audition for the next role. So I love that. Frank, you mentioned something in that breakdown that I really wanted to hit on, and it was Gavin Williams. And it goes into the spring dominance that he showed. He did have a little bit of a misstep at the end of spring training, but a lot of hype built around his arsenal, his effectiveness, his breaks being different, the slider being back and more crisp. You've done this now for so long, right? And you've been a fan as long as you laid out for us. Do you buy in at all to spring training anymore? And if you do, does Gavin Williams kind of hurt that case? Because I bought more into Williams this year, and he's burned me.
It is a great question, and I've got to be honest, I feel like a bit of a noob because I bought in way too much to spring training this year, and we've talked about it on the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast too. I think part of spring training and the problem for us is that we are so close to it and that we are so excited for baseball to be back, and we are doing a daily podcast throughout spring training where we have all these different data points and discussion points and really other smart people in the industry. I'm talking about like the pitching gurus, Eno Saris and Lance Brazdowski and Nick Pollock, weighing in with these awesome pitcher takes throughout spring. And it's hard for me to ignore when they're talking about things that they're seeing that are new. I'm starting to buy in, and the entire industry is starting to buy in. And I just thought, in hindsight now, maybe we bought in too much. And this is kind of like the oldest adage in fantasy baseball is like, spring training doesn't really matter. Now, maybe I should have bought into that more. And I don't want to say that spring training doesn't matter, because there are some things like batting lineups and like velocity being up and things like that. But I don't think that you should fundamentally change your view on a player. If you do the research in the offseason, I mean, that's why we have, November through January. You do your research, you get a kind of a preliminary idea, a take that you have for a player. That should not all fundamentally change based on things that you see in spring training. And I think part of the problem is that's what we did. Like, we kind of changed everything and moved guys way up draft boards based on what we saw in spring training. And, this is kind of a lesson for me, a lesson for, I think, all of us on that podcast and on Fantasy Baseball Today is like, remember this for next year. Like, yes, we're excited baseball is back, but don't, buy into things a bit too much. As for Gavin Williams in particular, the control has been a huge problem. It's over 4 walks per 9. He's been incredibly inefficient this season. That has been a problem throughout his minor league career. It has been a problem in his major league career. I was excited to see that, he was back to throwing the secondary, the breaking pitches more in spring training. The induced vertical break on that fastball was up. So it seemed like there were real reasons to buy into a breakout for Gavin Williams, and that still could happen. Again, it's the first month of the season. Like, from this point forward, Gavin Williams can perform like a top 30 starting pitcher, and I don't know that would really surprise too many people given his pedigree and his talent and, just his pitch characteristics and things like that. But what we're seeing right now is a pitcher that you should not be starting in fantasy and a borderline drop depending on the depth of your league. If you're playing a 12 team points league is a little bit tougher because like you need pitching and any pitchers that have a pulse are rostered in that league. But, a 12 team head-to-head categories league, yeah, like he might be on the chopping block in a league that shallow.
Counterpoint. Max Meyer, it's like, right? Yeah. It's like, and it's so weird because I feel like there was a point, it was like a stock, he kind of had his stock went up at one point earlier in spring. And by the end, I remember he was going for value again. And no one was really buying in. And now is he one of the best young pitchers in baseball? We'll find out.
Yeah,
could go the other way.
That's a really good counterpoint there, and a totally fair one. And yeah, I don't think there's one right answer. I think, look, for someone that was going as late as a Max Meyer, right? Like entering draft season, he was an afterthought. He wasn't even being drafted. He was like outside the top 380p. He was someone like, if you did draft and hold leagues, you can get round 30 and beyond. Like, I think raising somebody like that up your draft board into like the 250 to 300 range, late round sleeper, totally fine. Gavin Williams was like a top one. He was like 175 ADP at the start of spring. And by the end, it was like 125. So, we're moving someone up like 5 rounds based on what we saw in spring training. I think it's things like that maybe we should avoid. But, you have a point on like the real late round dart throws. Like, yeah, those guys are the ones that we should take a chance on. Maybe not the names inside like the top 150, top 100, things like that.
I think you bring up a really good point, though. We have 5 more months of baseball, and the name from last year that sticks out for me that, potentially could be a Gavin Williams outcome, not likely, but Hunter Brown. Hunter Brown was being dropped in leagues almost across the board with an ERA that, if I remember correctly, was around 6. Rest of season into 2025, one of the best pitchers in fantasy baseball and in baseball. And then kind of to, showcase the spring doesn't necessarily matter. Shane Baz and what he's doing. It's a complete 180 from what we saw in spring training. And it's really, really hard. And I'm kind of falling in line with what you said there, Frank. Year after year, I get bit by at least one player. And it's hard because we don't know from an organization perspective what they're working on, what they're being directed to do. But Gavin Williams really, really did get a lot of us. And it's because, like you said, everybody was buying into the underlying signs. The next question I wanted to ask you, this was one that, Doc and I are really excited to bring up because we are more in the dynasty realm, right? And we get bogged down by prospects at times, right? We get really, really excited. And we've seen in recent years the jump from the minors to the majors, whether it's Jackson Holliday or it's Jackson Chourio for the Brewers for the first couple of months. That jump is huge. And you being mainly focused on the day-to-day activity of Major League Baseball, you guys have dove in a little bit on the weekends with the Fantasy Express, which I love, talking a little bit about the up-and-coming prospects. Through your years, what do you take away from top prospects and prospect returns in redraft leagues?
Yeah, I think it has changed quite a bit because about a decade ago, I think we were really spoiled with like the Carlos Correas and Corey Seagers who came up and just hit the ground running right away. And they were just like awesome. They became early round picks. And there was like almost no adjustment period for those guys. They were just great right away. So that was kind of a bit of a golden age there for prospects. And then it started to turn a little bit. And I think with the way that pitching has evolved and, this kind of lends itself to like a larger discussion, but velocity being up and spin rates. And for a while there was like the sticky stuff and the transition from going from minor league pitching as a minor league hitter, seeing minor league pitching to major league pitching became the hardest it's ever been. And I'll never forget the quote from Keston Hiura, who was supposed to be this huge prospect for the Brewers. He said, "It's harder now than it has ever been to make that jump from AAA to major league pitching." And I think he was right. And he said that like, 6-7 years ago, something like that at this point. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it wasn't that long ago, but yeah, I think with pitching getting tougher over the years, there has been more of an adjustment period for hitters. And we saw it last year with really all the Jacksons. Now, Jackson Holiday still trying to find his footing, but specifically Jackson Merrill, Jackson Trio, they got those first 2 months in, really weren't doing much. There was an adjustment period there, but boom, from June on, those guys were awesome. And I think that has kind of become more of the trend where it's like prospects have to come up, they have to fail a little bit. Maybe they get sent back down. They're awesome. They build their confidence back up. They come back up, and then they start to figure things out. Or sometimes they just figure things out at the major league level, like those Jacksons did last season. And I think it's a really good talking point for someone like Matt Shaw, who was a top prospect entering the season, obviously was not good, got sent down. I think in redraft leagues in particular, this is a great time to buy Matt Shaw, or even, if you have a bench spot to mess with, or a deeper league where you could just buy on him and you have that ability to wait. I could totally see a scenario where Matt Shaw comes up in June and he puts on something like a 2020 pace the rest of the season. Not going 2020, but maybe it's like 12-12 or whatever it might be, and flashes some of that power speed in a really good Cubs lineup. So I say all that to, I think that you just need to be more patient with prospects. You probably shouldn't have huge expectations right away, which is tough for us because we want to be so excited about like Nick Kurtz getting called up. And whenever Bubba Chandler gets called up, we want these guys to be awesome right away. And every now and then you get like a Paul Skeens and it just kind of works out that way. But I think more often than not, we are seeing a much bigger adjustment period for prospects than it was about a decade ago.
Every so often you get like a Paul Skeens or a Barry Bonds Jr., also known as Agustin Ramirez, the greatest player of our generation. Geez, man. Yeah, it's what's going to happen there. It's interesting, man. It's crazy. I think you said a lot of very accurate things there, but then also there was a point here last year, without getting into it too much, where Matt was a little bit angry with Wyatt Langford, and I'm not trying to shame Matt, but it's just like it's a point.
It's true.
Like,
it's true.
He was like, "Oh man, we were totally tricked. We bought all this hype on him. It's pretty obvious. That guys like." I think Jordan Walker was discussed as better, and Jackson Chourio even going into the season. A lot of people seeing that tooled up guy, and he's still crushing home runs. But you look at Chourio's profile; it's like again, really bad chase rates, not taking a walk right now. Maybe drinking his own Kool-Aid. Right, he's a young kid, and maybe he's like, I'm going to be a superstar. He'll probably be a star, maybe a superstar. But, if you start believing you are, you're still young, maybe you just swing at everything. You stop playing smart. Wyatt Langford, man. Frank, this. This is listen, and now this is evidence. I got to say it. I want to talk. I'm going off script here. I wrote it in the outline just now, 5 seconds ago, to see if you're paying attention. I'm hijacking the show. I want to talk about a couple of Doc's guys and just I want to know your thoughts on them, because I was hoping y'all weren't thinking I was some greaseball walking on into draft rooms, taking these silly guys just to get on the show or to make the article or whatever, or to get ripped on like I had some kind of weird masochistic tendency. But Wyatt Langford, Victor Scott, Caleb Durbin, those are 3 of the biggest names. Now, Wyatt Langford is in a different tier than the other 2. But Victor Scott got him, man. Last year was a year too early, pretty obvious. But this year, man, I got him last round everywhere, pretty much. If I could, and looking like maybe the bat won't hold up, but at this point, 50 stolen bases is completely in play. Really, really helps there. And Durbin, I'm so I can't fully flex on him yet because the stats aren't super sexy. It's he's not racking up the stolen bases yet. He has it a home run, but he's a really steady guy. He's getting on base. He's getting a hit or two. It's kind of a fun little muscle hamster. So I don't know, man. I'm hijacking the show, Frank. Do you have any thoughts on Doc's guys and when these guys were going up? When Caleb Durbin hit that home run, did you think of me?
I did think of you. And look, I think we did a mock draft I think it was last year. Not even this draft season. It was last year's draft season where in the chat room, you were like, hey, any Caleb Durbin thoughts? I was like, actually, yeah, randomly. I saw him in the Arizona Fall League 2 years ago, and he was awesome. He was just this spark plug player where he was racking up hits. He was getting on base. He was stealing everything, any chance that he had an opportunity to do that. And I get it. He's kind of like a lesser known prospect, and the most likely outcome is these guys don't work out, and the bat kind of just gets knocked out of their hands once they get to the major league level. But the Brewers liked him enough to trade away their all-star closer and get him as a piece in return. So I think there's some runway here. This is kind of the player that they've grown to like, which is like exactly that, the kind of speedy spark plug kind of guy, put the ball in play kind of thing. And I would be nice to, if he performs, start to see him move up the order a little bit. But I think there's kind of some sneaky, 10 homer, 20 steal potential from someone like Durbin as like a middle infielder this season. Wyatt Langford has been incredible. Obviously, when he had the oblique injury, which is crazy because like oblique injury in spring training, other oblique injury during the season. And you start thinking, all right, well, the way my mind works is whenever there's an injury early on in the season, and I don't like to think this way, but it's just like, I don't know, this kind of negative, pessimistic view. I'm like, all right, his season's over. That's just like the way my mind works is like, oh, I guess it's a down season for Wyatt Langford. This isn't going to work out. And like, you shouldn't think that way. It's, again, players can heal. He's young enough. He's come back and he's looked just incredible this season. He looks like every bit the early round player that, people were drafting and pushing him up to be. And obviously he has that talent. I think Matt was right in being frustrated with Langford for a lot of last season. He kind of slowly picked things up June, July, August, September. Boom. Guy looked like a superstar, league winner for some people in fantasy leagues last year with Wyatt Langford. And looks like he's kind of building off that September he had last year. Victor Scott, he's got the 9 steals. Batting average has started to creep down a little bit. Strikeouts going up a little bit. So I do worry about, all right, come on, let's continue putting that ball in play. Because the biggest thing is like, you can't steal first. You got to find a way to get on base. He's another player I saw in the Arizona Fall League a couple of years ago. Incredibly impressed. Anytime he was on base, he was like, he would steal second and third, like on consecutive pitches. He was insane. He's like, this is one of the fastest players I've ever seen. It's just, can he make enough contact? Can he hit enough line drives? And so far, he's done a decent job of that. If he can maintain being even a 250 hitter, I think we get a legitimate like 40+ steal season out of him.
Yeah, and Doc loves himself some Augustine Ramirez, and we're seeing great returns, at least in the first week plus of play. And I know that you guys have touched on it on the show yourselves, and you brought it up in comparison to Yainer Diaz, who is also struggling, has shown a little bit of life over the last week. When you're looking at Augustine Ramirez, what we've seen, the pitchers in the league haven't yet made the adjustments, as we saw from the 2 home run performance in Seattle. Where are you placing him? Is he a starter in a 1-catcher 12-man league? Are you looking to keep him on the bench if you feel like your catcher's a little bit riskier? What are your overall thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's kind of right on that back end of the top 12 at the catcher position for me. And I've said, the back end of catcher in a 1-catcher league, it should be designated for guys that are just hot right now. Like ride the hot hand. I think, we have typically 6, 7, 8 catchers that we just feel good about. Like they're just in your lineup, set it and forget it. But then that back end is like, all right, interchangeable. Let's just like ride the hot hand type of thing. And Augustine Ramirez obviously is the hot hand right now. Talking about the best player who ever lived. I mean, he is doing some incredible things right now. It's an 8% walk rate, 8% strikeout rate. Swing decisions look incredible. The zone contact is solid so far. Not swinging and missing, hitting the ball incredibly hard. He has 2 stolen base attempts as a catcher already, which is just awesome. And he absolutely could be like the breakout catcher this season. And with that, like, I understand people are frustrated with a Yainer Diaz or JT Realmuto. Like, Augustine Ramirez absolutely could be a catcher we're drafting in the top 50 picks next season. Like, that definitely could happen. It's just too early for me to say that definitively. If this keeps going for the next 2 months, I have no choice but to concede and say, all right, yeah, like this guy looks legit. He had the prospect pedigree. It's absolutely happening. This guy's a top 5 catcher. Boom. It's just too early for me to kind of make that proclamation right now. He could get to that point. If I have a struggling Yainer Diaz, if I have a struggling JT Realmuto, I wouldn't drop those guys for him, but I have to imagine you have a dead roster spot somewhere. Drop somebody else. Bench those guys. Start in Augustine Ramirez, but I would not just flat out just drop someone like a Yainer Diaz. Even Salvador Perez is off to a slow start. I would not drop any of those top 6 or 8 catchers to pick up Augustine Ramirez right now.
Yeah, and I think it's like, I've kind of had this thought lately when it comes to batters or pitchers. It's more concerning with pitchers, I guess. But in terms of like a young prospect or young players trajectory, if they go from like completely tearing it up to the worst player ever, which Yainer Diaz is like kind of in that level right now, as long as they're not injured, that's where the caveat is with the pitchers, because that's TJ potentially. But as long as they're not injured, it's like, okay, well, we know that's not who they are. Like I'm almost like more concerned if like Yainer Diaz goes from like a 280 plus average to like a 240, 250 average. Like I'm like, oh, okay, that's like, it looks like he's staying there. So that's his new profile. I'm like, oh, that's who you are now. That's not good. Like Yainer Diaz is so bad right now that I just have no idea who he really is in terms of like the production this year. But I can guarantee you one thing: he's not this bad, which means you can trade him probably at some point. He's going to go on a run to balance things out, like you were saying earlier in the show. Jake Berger last year, straight up right now, he's still in that early portion of last year. Jake Berger himself, starting slow, but he's going to make it up at some point. Yainer Diaz most likely will do the same thing. Agustin Ramirez, it's such an interesting profile. Is someone where CBS, y'all don't do a ton of dynasty mocks. I try to make myself available as much as I can. They're so much fun. Appreciate y'all having me there. I felt like, am I just stubborn? Am I a psycho? Am I a weirdo? Because I just drafted according to my ranks for the most part. And I always got Agustin Ramirez. This was someone where, and maybe, I guess I would ask you just to follow up real quick on Agustin before we move on, would be, it seemed to me like when he was in the Yankees, I know you're a Yankees fan, it seemed like when he was in front of that New York media spotlight, we were hearing things like generational bat. Like that was the peak. That was crazy. And is it though? Maybe that guy was right. But point is, he went from that kind of like this crazy hype was building. I had him at one point a 6 overall prospect. I'm like, even that sounds crazy, but he ended up no less than the 20th. I haven't looked, but 15 to 20 kind of slot for me. I felt like I was crazy, but I looked at his production with Miami and I'm like in the minors and I'm like, he's got the same profile. He's the same guy. If I believe then, I have to believe now. So I held my ground. Frank, like, do you have any memories of like really kind of following him as a Yankees fan?
Yeah, so he really broke out onto the scene last year and became this, huge breakout prospect. And, he was the big piece in the Jazz Chisholm trade, and so I wasn't surprised by that. I do think sometimes and look, I'm not a prospect guru, prospect hound by any means, but I hadn't really heard Agustin Ramirez's name before last year when he broke out. So I think whenever there's a player that just kind of bursts onto the scene in the minor leagues, like there's always still a little bit of hesitancy of like, okay, is this real? We don't have like multiple years in the minors of him doing this. Like there's not a huge track record. So I think there was partially some hesitance for that coming into this season. And I think, it's a good learning point for you that you stuck to your guns. And I think something that other people can learn from is that, especially with prospects, I hear this a lot when I listen to prospect content, is just kind of sticking to your guns, because it's a very up and down ride for prospects, and prospect progression is not linear, and these are all things that we hear, and it takes a long time. But yeah, he was always an interesting prospect this offseason. It's just I didn't know when he would be up for the Marlins, right? I didn't know if they were just going to be, hey, we're stubborn, we're going to not call him up until like June or July, blah blah blah. But I think here we go, a couple of weeks into the season, maybe they gain that extra year of arbitration, whatever it might be, whenever that cutoff was. But he's up now. Looks like he's going to play every day, even if, Nick Fortes is back at some point. DH, maybe first base. I know you're shaking your head, man, but the Marlins do some baffling things. I think that Agustin Ramirez is here to stay one way or another. That's the point, is like DH or first base, he could still get his at-bats no matter what. And I think he's actually looked pretty good behind the plate, just in terms of what I've seen, like framing and things so far. I think he's looked really good. And he caught that 14 strikeout game from Max Meyer last week. So he did a great job in that one game. It might have been his first game as a catcher in the major league level. So yeah, absolute 2020 potential. And I think he is someone maybe we should have been more aggressive on entering this draft season.
I'm just laughing. Sorry, I just explained my laughter is like, it just sounds hilarious when you're talking about, we're hyping up this phenom who's just absolutely crushing baseball, grabbing national headlines. But Nick Fortes, It's like, but who? You know what I'm saying? And like, it would be such a travesty. So no, I think he's, thank God, done enough, hopefully, to hold off the magnificent Nick Fortes. And I'm sorry to his family who's listening if they are. Nick Fortes, wish you the best, but come on.
But I think it's interesting that you both brought it up because, you had alluded to him being the one that caught Max Meyer's great, breakout performance with the strikeouts. And I watched the first few innings, and I want to say it was the first inning where Meyer had Ramirez come out to the mound, and they had a quick chat. And the broadcasters even said, they're like, oh, well, here's an issue, a young catcher catching a young pitcher. We're going to have to see how that goes. Well, it goes on to be a great night for Meyer and maybe a career night. I think that helped his case even more than some of the offensive numbers for playing time moving forward, because it is a younger staff / developing staff, and they need these pitchers to be in line with their number one catcher. So I think that was a great vote of confidence for him moving forward. We've seen the offense jump off the charts since. The underlying data is fantastic. And that kind of breaks us into the next question here, Frank. Doc and I, again, leaning with more prospects when we're doing our evaluation. Sometimes it is harder to get the underlying numbers if they're not at AAA or low A. When you're looking at major league players for breakouts, what are some of the key underlying data, sabermetrics that you use, and how do you pair those together, right? We have so many of them. I like EV, max EV, chase rate, in zone contact. Those are my building blocks. What do you like to use as your building blocks?
Yeah, so from a surface level, I just start with strikeout rate and walk rate. Just want to make sure those things are as close to the same as possible. Like, yeah, I would love a hitter that has more walks than strikeouts, right? Like we all would, but there's not that many of those in the game. And obviously strikeouts have just, climbed and climbed over the years. So just starting surface level, strikeouts and walks, but then definitely average exit velocity, max exit velocity. I like to look at barrel rate is something just because like that's optimal contact. That's what I'm looking for in terms of getting to power and doing so consistently. I like to look at in-zone contact rate, chase rates, swinging strike rates. Those are three kind of under the hood plate discipline metrics that I really like to focus on for plate discipline. But yeah, just the ability to hit the ball hard and hit the ball, I guess, the right way. And I say that as someone who has never been very good at baseball myself. I'm like an armchair baseball player, like talking about fake baseball. But, I want to see guys that hit a lot of line drives and pull fly balls. And, if you're a power hitter, not hitting too many ground balls. So it's like batted ball distribution, quality of contact, surface level plate discipline, and then underlying plate discipline. It's kind of like the main ingredients that I'm looking for specifically in a hitter.
And
that's a complete failure of an answer. I wanted to hear heart and guts layered with a little seasoning of grit. Gosh, man. I was watching that Boston Red Sox, the comeback on Netflix. My wife actually pushed me to watch it. I know, Frank, that's forbidden. You'll never watch it because your heart would implode.
We'll never watch it. But shout out to your wife.
It is great. It is great.
And Grady Little showed up, and he's the manager. Kind of blew it in 2003, keeping Pedro out there. You probably love that. You love Grady Little, so we can talk about Grady Little. But man, I was watching this guy. I'm like, that's a baseball guy. This guy, if you saw a sabermetric, he'd friggin' strangle it with his humongous bare hand. Just like, yeah, man. Anyway, I'm rambling now, but
I'm happy you bring that up though. Like, I love to work in human elements where I can. And I understand it's so hard because like this is a numbers game and we're doing a fantasy podcast and we play a fantasy game that is revolved specifically around numbers. There is not a roto category for heart or grit or things like that or toughness. But I like, seeing things, watching the games that, and look, it doesn't happen all the time because, okay, I've got 4 games going on at once, but I'm also building the rundown. So I'm not watching these games intently. It's like I have them on in the background. When an announcer starts yelling, I start paying more attention to what's going on. But I watched spring training and Cam Smith was someone that I watched in spring. And I just said, he just looks like a ball player. It's like the most basic take, but it was just, he went up there with confidence. He hit the ball hard. He hit the ball to all fields. He looked great out in the field, even transitioning to the outfield. It was just like the most kind of boomer take that I had this spring, but I watched him play like one game in spring and I was like, that dude just looks like a ball player. And sometimes you can just see things like that. He's off to a slow start. He's going to struggle, but at some point, I think Cam Smith is probably going to figure it out. Guy looks like a ball player. So, any ways that we can kind of work that in, I like to kind of, work in the human element whenever we can, which is not that often.
If you want me to be like, I usually like to play up that side, because I genuinely do love it. But it's like, if you want to be serious, baseball is a romantic game. And if you take that romance out, if you want to take it out completely, I just think it's going to dilute the product. And that's like even a corporate way to say it. It's just going to make it less fun. Baseball should be fun. And I even tell people sometimes, like, of course, it's objective reality. Like, yes, if you are offered Nick Fortes for Augustin Ramirez, take Ramirez. But genuinely, like, if there's so many, I'm sure you get a lot of these. You probably have zero time for it. I get a lot of like, should I do this trade or that trade? Especially in the dynasty world where you get niched down with prospects, and with all the outcomes for prospects, sometimes it's close enough where I'm just like, guy, I tell them, go with your gut. And I tell them, listen, this is close enough where either side could work out. You have to, at some point, steer your own ship, and you have to like and trust the player you're dealing with here. And frankly, like for me personally, if I'm doing FYPD, first year player draft, if I'm picking, prospects, or if I'm looking for whatever, if any chance I get to listen to a player talk, really, or just see how they act on the field, see their body language, frankly, just transparency. Sorry, Frank, I'm not a Jazz Chisholm guy at this point. If Judge can't smarten him up, I just don't know if it's going to happen. But his body language, I don't love. I kind of love. Yeah, there's just certain players out there where, like Caleb Durbin, you're 5'4", and like, you're who knows, like he's something really. The fact that he's come from a D3 school and just like, I know he's just, his tenacity's there. He's 120% motor. Like, that's the opposite, right? Whereas Jazz Chisholm is like, man, I just see so much talent in you, but your brain, you're getting ahead of it. Just focus, make it simple.
No, it's really interesting that you bring that up too. And given, your background, like we started this off, you do acting gigs and everything. And, it's interesting. Like, one of the most successful fantasy players I know, both redraft and dynasty, is Ian Kahn. And he is a successful actor. And like, I'll never forget, when I first met him, we had him like back when I was at the Fantasy Sports Network, we had him in studio. We had him on our radio show. We were talking to him about fantasy baseball stuff. And like, yeah, he looks at numbers and things, but like doesn't go super deep. He studies body language, and he just like watches games and see how players react. And he told me he's a great dynasty player. He's like, I saw an interview, and this was like way back. This was, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. It's like, I saw an interview with Michael Kopech in the minors, and he had this girlfriend that was there, and she was interrupting every question that he was being asked. And he's like, I will never roster Michael Kopech because he has a crazy girlfriend who's going to turn into a crazy wife, or at least he attracts crazy women like this. And it was like the most absurd, out of left field take that I ever heard. And guess what? Michael Kopech, I mean, I don't know if it's because of crazy women or anything, but it hasn't really worked out in his major league career. So it's just interesting hearing you talk that way. And another really great fantasy player that I have interacted with, Ian Kahn, who also has an acting background, does the same thing. I think it's really interesting.
I think we follow each other. Sorry, Matt hasn't talked in 1,000 years, but I think we actually follow each other. And I'll have to go hit up this Ian Kahn fella. And
you guys, if you get him on the podcast, he's very busy. He does like political stuff too. But if you can get him on, like, absolutely, he is just an absolute joy to listen to.
Cool.
Yeah, Doc, you might have more in common with him than we thought. Right? There's a lot of similarities there. It's interesting, and Frank, you won't watch it. Doc had brought it up earlier. The Red Sox documentary. I think it actually plays into this conversation though, because it allows us to see within the lives of the players. Take away the fact that the Red Sox. It was one of the first times that I took the mathematics of fantasy baseball, the game itself of fantasy baseball, and really started to fall in love again with just the players for being human. Right. And understanding what they're going through mentally, they're going through physically, because it's easy to forget when you're bogged down with looking at the minor leagues, looking at the production at the major leagues, and the body language, as you both just brought up, can really be the difference maker in how a season goes. Confidence, overall health. And I don't think we pay enough attention to it at times, because you had even talked about it earlier, right? When you're doing work, you might have 3 games on, you might have big inning on. There's not the same kind of attention grabbed there at each individual player watching 9 innings. I think that's something as an industry we could get better at, blending the old school scouting as well as the new, say, sabermetric mathematic approach. I wanted to kind of transition before we cast off for the day into the post-hype concept. Doc and I have talked recently. I am personally falling in love. I think he is as well, with prospects, as you had mentioned earlier, like Jackson Holliday, after losing some of that prospect shine, getting adjusted to the major leagues, as you had mentioned, and then finally figuring it out. Do you tend to spend more time in the off season looking at post-hype players? And if you do you take more of an aggressive approach within your leagues with a few players, or do you like to see things play out and you'll use the waiver wire in season?
So obviously it depends on the depth of the league. Like I love taking shots on post hype prospects and breakouts later in drafts. I mean, obviously last year, like Colton Cowser was a prime example, and his first go around, he was not very good, and then he failed, and then his second year, boom, gets an opportunity, and obviously he was awesome, finished top 3 in AL Rookie of the Year voting. I almost like to take a just blind faith approach with top prospects who have failed, and this is what I love about like the game that we play, is that people are so quick to give up on top prospects who the first time they come through, they fail. Everyone just wants to give up on these guys. I can guarantee you that when Matt Shaw comes up later this season, there will not be quite the level of excitement as there was for Matt Shaw entering the season, just because we haven't seen him before. Or, contrary to that, a prospect that we have not seen play in the majors yet, there will be much more excitement for than someone like Matt Shaw, who has already failed, although it's been like 15, 20 games, a really, really small sample size. So I almost just like to blind faith, buy into the top high-end prospects who have failed, and take those guys late in my drafts or pick them up on the waiver wire once they get back to the majors. Now, granted, it hasn't worked with Jackson Holliday. I have him in a few leagues, and he hasn't been good. And he's still so young. He's like 21, 22 years old. Sometimes
21.
This takes a while to figure things out. Like Lucas Giolito, top pitching prospect in all of baseball. And he had an entire season where he had the highest qualified ERA in baseball. He was atrocious. He was terrible. And then boom, next thing you know, we're drafting him as like a top 10, top 15 starting pitcher for the next 3 years in fantasy. So it can kind of flip that quickly. Byron Buxton, it took a long time for him to figure it out. Now, he hasn't really stayed healthy much of his career, but there have been points when he's been healthy where he's been a really dynamic player for fantasy. So sometimes it can take a really long time. There's no like one catch-all answer to a question like this. Me generally, yes, I like to take late round darts on, post-hype prospect breakouts who have not figured it out yet. And I will do the same thing in season this year with somebody like Matt Shaw.
I mean, we just have to remember, so in the prospect world, age to level is like a classic thing I look at, and I think every prospect guy looks at. So 21 years old, just for framing this, because we're spoiled with the Jackson Merrills and the Jackson Churios, and occasionally there's a Bryce Harper every 10 years or so. But the 21 is young for double A. That's how old Jackson Holliday is in the big leagues right now. And we can sit here and it's so funny because on a cognizant level, we'll all be like, oh yeah, Jackson or 21. Yeah, it's young for double A. Yeah. Oh, MLB has never been harder than triple A. Like the gap has never been wider. But then Jackson Holliday will come up and like play like kind of fine, like what he's doing right now. And we're like, oh gosh, the kid's just never gonna make it. It's and maybe we're not saying it, but a lot of us are like, when's it gonna happen, kid? And so it does feel strange though, because I'm with you. It's like it feels a little bit of, you got to keep the faith if you believed, and it should be faith that's built on something. But again, I don't think a kid goes from having just an elite, amazing eye and all these abilities in the minor leagues at such a young age, young for the level, double A and triple A, and then just become a completely different player at the major leagues. No, it's like a classic case. And this is something will become obvious in hindsight, I think. Like, oh, obviously he was 20, he was 21. That's why he was struggling. So we live in a world where we have to get off this podcast soon, but we also live in a world where people have TikTok. It's the classic boomer take. It's a TikTok generation, but it's a very like a short attention span, short patience. What have you done for me lately? What have you done for me lately? Fantasy football. It's crazy, bro. Like I'll see people on Victor Scott's profile. They're like, drop, done, back to back 3 for 4 games. oh man, whoever I thought this guy was going to not work out. Now we're like a couple games later, and now the same people are saying drop him again. And I'm like, y'all don't know what you're doing. Like, y'all got to figure it out. Baseball is a classic game. It's a game of a little thing called patience. And it's so cool to hear a lot of what you said today, Frank. It's been great having you on because you've been preaching that. And frankly, the patient will be rewarded in fantasy baseball, in my opinion.
And I understand why people want, like, you'd rather be in first place after the first month than in last place of your fantasy baseball league. Now, if you're in last place, it might be hard to make it all the way back up to first, but it's not impossible. Like, it's still a long season, and there are a lot of useful players and high-end players that are struggling and off to slow starts. And I would just implore people to stick with it and, ride it out, continue to set your lineups. And I think it does kind of come back to like, TikTok generation type thing, because a lot of people nowadays, they want that kind of like instant gratification, and they don't necessarily have patience to wait out a 6-month season. Like fantasy football, you have all the action basically in one day. And it's like, all right, you have like a new matchup every week. You set, you put in waivers once a week and you set your lineup, and boom, that's it. Like, every week there's a new experience and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's, right away, like people are scoring touchdowns or they're not. Baseball's just different, man. You've got to stick with it.
It's interesting. You both brought up the idea of changes and growth through experience with major leaguers that are young. There's a fantastic interview that Jose Bautista did, and I'll try to share it on X later. And he talks about the hitting coach for the Blue Jays instilling in him preload, and how he had heard that his entire minor league career, but yet he never understood it. And he says in one of his first at-bats, he tried it because he was kind of forced to do so, and he hit a home run. And he said, as soon as I made contact, it clicked. I understood finally what these coaches for so long have been trying to tell me. And it's interesting because at times that's life as well, but that's the mechanics of baseball. Until you've done it yourself and you know the feeling to replicate it over and over and over, it may just not click. We'll probably see that for Jackson Holliday. We saw it for Merrill. We're seeing it for Wyatt Langford. It's just a matter of when do they actually have that aha moment. But Frank, I wanted to thank you for being on the show today. It was awesome. You were just fantastic. I'm glad we got to see you in your true analyst form. I hope we get to see more of that. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. Sorry, I did my best Scott White and Chris Towers impression today, just talking and talking and talking. So hopefully I didn't talk too much. Obviously want you guys to get your takes in there as well. But no, this was a lot of fun. Nice to finally meet you, Doc, after doing years of mock drafts and now competing in real drafts together as well. But thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Doc, go ahead and send us out.
It ain't going to be the same without a mustache, but I'm your Huckleberry.
We'll see you guys next week.